Here are the stories shaping the world this morning and why they matter. In Venezuela, rescue and recovery crews are still working through the devastation north of Caracas after two powerful earthquakes struck in quick succession last Wednesday. Venezuelan authorities said that, as of Monday, 19 people had been confirmed dead, with many others still missing or displaced. Both earthquakes were above magnitude 7. The U.S. Geological Survey classified the shaking as violent, one step below its highest category. A United Nations official said at least 2,500 buildings had collapsed. For families in the hardest-hit areas, the crisis is not only the scale of the destruction, but the uncertainty. An independent missing person website has received more than 40,000 reports, reflecting the desperate effort to locate relatives and neighbors. Connectivity problems have made that harder, leaving many people unable to confirm whether loved ones are safe. There have also been rescues that have given emergency teams and families reason to keep searching. A woman and her 18-day-old baby were pulled alive from the rubble after 32 hours. A boy was rescued after being trapped for 4 days. Those recoveries have stood out amid a grim and difficult operation. Heavy rescue equipment remains in short supply. That matters because collapsed concrete, damaged roads, and unstable buildings can slow the work of reaching people who may still be alive and of recovering those who died with dignity. The government has set up a team to check whether buildings and infrastructure are safe. That will be essential for families deciding whether they can return home, for workers trying to reopen shops and clinics, and for children whose schools may have been damaged. The immediate priority is rescue, shelter, medical care, and clean water. The longer-term challenge will be rebuilding in a way that gives communities more protection before the next disaster. Across Europe, a deadly heatwave is straining cities, power systems, and public health services, with temperatures reaching record or near-record levels in central and eastern countries. A town in eastern Germany recorded 41.7 degrees Celsius on Sunday. Slovakia registered a record 41 degrees on Monday. Hungary, Poland, and Serbia also saw, or were expecting, temperatures around 40 degrees Celsius. Wildfires have broken out in Croatia and Albania. The World Health Organization's Director General said more than 300 excess deaths linked to high temperatures had been recorded in Europe since June 21. Those deaths are a reminder that heat is not just uncomfortable weather. It is a public health risk, especially for older people, outdoor workers, children, people with disabilities, and families in poorly insulated housing. Ukraine has ordered power cuts to cope with heat-related strain. In Hungary, Prime Minister Peter Magyar asked government employees to work from home where possible. Hungary also requested that restaurants provide drinking water and that air-conditioned public venues stay open. Those measures point to an important shift in how governments are responding. Heat waves are increasingly treated as emergencies that require public cooling spaces, water access, worker protections, and reliable electricity. But the gaps are still large. The International Energy Agency said only about 20% of European households had air conditioners as of 2022. That means many families cannot simply cool their homes when temperatures become dangerous. The World Meteorological Organization has warned that heat waves are likely to become longer, more frequent, and more intense as global warming continues. For city leaders, employers, and national governments, that makes adaptation a practical necessity. Shaded streets, heat alerts, cooling centers, limits on outdoor labor during peak heat, and support for people who cannot afford higher energy bills. The immediate concern is saving lives this week. The broader issue is building cities that can protect people in a warmer climate. Australia and Vanuatu have signed a Security and Development Pact in Canberra after months of delay, placing new limits on foreign military infrastructure in Vanuatu while expanding cooperation on critical projects. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Vanuatu's Jotam Napart formalized the agreement in Canberra on Monday. Under the pact, Vanuatu will not allow foreign military bases or military infrastructure on its territory. Vanuatu will also work with Australia to develop critical infrastructure, and the deal requires Vanuatu to consult Australia on proposed third-party involvement in such projects. Australia is reportedly considering about $340 million for Vanuatu over the next decade or so. For people in Vanuatu, the most direct question is whether that support leads to better roads, ports, energy systems, communications, and climate resilience. Small island states often face high costs for infrastructure, while also being highly exposed to storms, sea level rise, and supply disruptions. The agreement also reflects the wider contest for influence in the Pacific. China said cooperation should promote regional development and stability, and should not target any third party or be used for geopolitical competition. The pact had been expected during Albanese's visit to Vanuatu last September, but Vanuatu abruptly pulled back at that time. The language on foreign military infrastructure is significant, but so is the development side. Security in the Pacific is not only about bases or defense policy. It is also about whether communities have reliable services, whether young people can find work, and whether governments have the resources to respond to climate and economic shocks. The test for this agreement will be whether it strengthens Vanuatu's sovereignty while delivering practical benefits for ordinary people. In Monaco, authorities are investigating what they described as a deliberate explosion at a residential building on Monday. 3 people were wounded, including a teenager and Ukrainian oligarch Vadim Yermolayev. Authorities said the attacker left a bag or package in the lobby before fleeing. The suspect is believed to have crossed into neighboring France. Prince Albert II called the explosion an odious act, and Monaco said state services were mobilized in close cooperation with French authorities. Yermolayev has been under Ukrainian sanctions since December 2023 over reported alcohol business activity in Russian-occupied Crimea. That detail may become part of the investigation's context, but authorities have not announced a confirmed motive. For residents, the incident is unsettling because Monaco is small, heavily policed, and rarely associated with this kind of targeted violence. The practical concerns now are public safety, cross-border coordination, and clarity about whether there is any continuing threat. The involvement of French authorities is especially important because Monaco's geography makes a domestic security incident quickly become an international one. Investigators will be trying to establish who planted the package, how it was brought into the building, whether the victims were targeted, and whether the suspect had support. For the wounded and their families, the case is first a matter of recovery and accountability. For Monaco's government, it is also a test of how quickly a small state can respond when an attack appears to move across borders within minutes. Malaysia has extended its contract with exploration firm Ocean Infinity for another year to continue the search for Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, more than 12 years after the plane disappeared. Flight MH370 vanished from radar shortly after taking off from Kuala Lumpur on March 8, 2014. It was bound for Beijing with 239 people on board, most of them Chinese passengers. Multiple search operations have failed to locate the aircraft so far. Malaysia's cabinet has now extended the agreement with Ocean Infinity until the end of June next year. Malaysia's transport minister said the extension reflects a commitment to providing closure for the next of kin. For the families of those aboard, the long search has been marked by grief, unanswered questions, and the exhausting burden of uncertainty. Many relatives have continued to urge the government not to give up. The extension does not guarantee that the aircraft will be found, but it keeps alive the possibility of answers. The disappearance of MH370 remains one of aviation's most painful mysteries. It also carries practical consequences for air safety, because locating the wreckage could help investigators better understand what happened and whether any lessons can still be drawn. For families, closure is not an abstract word. It can mean knowing where a loved one's final journey ended. It can mean a chance to mourn with more certainty. And it can mean confidence that governments and the aviation industry are still willing to pursue the truth, even after many years. In Peru, the presidential runoff remains politically tense after the final vote count was released on Monday, with media outlets declaring Keiko Fujimori the winner and rival Roberto Sanchez, indicating he will contest the narrow result before the official announcement. Peru's electoral authority released the final vote count after the early June runoff. Media outlets said Fujimori won 50.1% of the vote, while Sanchez received 49.9%. Election authorities plan to announce the winner on July 3rd. Fujimori is the eldest daughter of former President Alberto Fujimori, who died in 2024. Sanchez is a former foreign trade and tourism minister. Fujimori wrote that she is waiting for official results and said Peru is closer to a path of order and hope. The margin is extremely narrow, and that makes the next steps important. A contested election can deepen distrust if institutions are not transparent. But a careful legal review can also help protect legitimacy, especially when the result is so close. For Peruvians, the stakes are not only political. Families are looking for stability, jobs, public safety, and functioning services after years of turbulence. Workers and small business owners need a government that can make decisions and maintain confidence. Rural communities and urban neighborhoods alike will be watching whether the process is handled peacefully and according to the rules. The official announcement on July 3rd will be a key moment. Until then, the priority for Peru's institutions is to count, review, and communicate clearly. In a close election, patience and transparency are not delays. They are part of what makes the outcome credible. Japan's cabinet has approved a bill revising imperial house rules, a move aimed at addressing the shrinking size of the imperial family while stopping short of allowing women to succeed to the throne. The cabinet approved the revisions at a meeting on Tuesday. Under current rules, female members leave the imperial household when they marry commoners. Under the bill, women would be allowed to remain in the imperial family after marriage. A transitional measure would allow female members who are present when the law takes effect to request to leave upon marriage. The imperial family consists of Emperor Naruhito and 15 others. Only 3 members are currently eligible to succeed to the throne. The imperial house law limits succession to males in the male line. The bill would also allow adoption of certain male line descendants from 11 former imperial branches that lost status in 1947. Adoptees would have to be 15 or older, unmarried, and childless. They would not be eligible to succeed to the throne themselves, but their male offspring would be eligible. The government aims to pass the bill during the current Diet session. The proposal reflects both change and caution. Allowing female members to remain after marriage could help preserve the imperial family's public duties and reduce pressure on a small number of people. At the same time, the bill keeps the male line succession rule in place, leaving broader questions about gender equality unresolved. For ordinary Japanese families, the debate may feel distant from daily concerns such as wages, housing, and care work. But it also touches on how one of the country's oldest institutions adapts to modern expectations. The question is whether Japan can balance tradition with the realities of a smaller family, changing gender roles, and public support for a more sustainable system. Russian President Vladimir Putin has claimed that Russia agreed to a U.S. compromise proposal regarding Ukraine at a summit last August, while signaling that Moscow is ready for further talks. Putin made the claim in an interview aired Sunday by Russian state-run media. He did not disclose details of the proposal. He said he doubted that European leaders had persuaded President Donald Trump to shift in favor of Ukraine. Putin also said he expects Trump's special envoy to visit Russia and expressed readiness to continue negotiations. A Russian diplomatic source told NHK that the Kremlin is increasingly inclined to distrust Trump. The comments matter because they are part of the diplomatic positioning around the war in Ukraine. Public statements about proposed compromises can be used to shape expectations, apply pressure, and influence allies. Without details, it is difficult to evaluate what Russia says it accepted, what Ukraine would have been asked to accept, or whether the proposal was ever viable. For Ukrainians living through the war, the central issues remain security, sovereignty, displacement, and survival. Families want an end to attacks, the return of loved ones, and the ability to rebuild homes, schools, and workplaces. For Russian families, the war has also brought military losses, economic pressure, and restrictions at home. European governments continue to see Ukraine's defense as tied to wider security on the continent. Any negotiation process would have to address not only high-level diplomacy, but the lived reality of occupied territory, prisoners, destroyed infrastructure, and communities divided by war. The constructive opening, if there is one, is that talks are still being discussed. But negotiations that affect Ukraine's future will be judged by whether they respect Ukraine's agency and produce a durable peace, not just a pause in fighting. The United States and Iran are giving conflicting accounts of whether negotiations will take place in Doha, with Washington describing planned high-level meetings and Tehran saying no negotiation meetings are scheduled. President Donald Trump said a meeting would be held in Doha on Tuesday. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner would attend high-level meetings there, and that technical talks would be held on the sidelines. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei confirmed that Tehran would send a technical delegation to Doha this week. But Baghaei said there would be no negotiation meetings at any level in the coming days. Iran also said the visits by U.S. representatives and the Iranian delegation are unrelated. The disagreement may reflect diplomatic messaging as much as scheduling. Governments sometimes describe the same encounter differently to manage domestic politics, avoid appearing too eager, or preserve room to maneuver. Still, the lack of clarity matters. U.S.-Iran tensions affect regional security, energy markets, sanctions, and the lives of ordinary people in Iran who face economic pressure and limited access to global systems. They also affect families across the Middle East who are vulnerable to any escalation. Technical talks, even when modest, can sometimes reduce risk by clarifying details and keeping channels open. But conflicting public statements can also create mistrust if expectations are not managed carefully. For now, the new development is that both sides acknowledge some form of presence in Doha this week, while disagreeing over whether that amounts to negotiation. The next test is whether quiet diplomacy can produce practical steps, or whether the two governments remain focused on denying each other's version of events. In South Africa, police have deployed to prevent possible unrest as an unofficial deadline set by citizen-led anti-migrant groups arrived on Tuesday. Those groups had demanded that undocumented foreign nationals leave the country. Hundreds of foreign nationals have taken refuge in several cities and sought urgent help to leave. Thousands of people had already fled the country. Anti-migrant protesters said undocumented foreigners and those connected to them should go. Protesters also accused the government of corruption and failing to act. The situation is tense because migration, unemployment, public services, and crime are often pushed together in public anger, even when the causes are more complex. South Africa has deep inequality and high pressure on jobs, housing, clinics, and schools. Migrants can become targets when people feel abandoned by government or excluded from economic opportunity. For foreign nationals, the immediate fear is safety, whether they can go to work, keep children in school, visit clinics, or remain in their homes without intimidation. For South African families in struggling communities, the concerns are also real. Lack of jobs, weak services, and frustration with corruption. The danger is when that frustration turns toward vulnerable neighbors rather than accountable institutions. Police deployment may help prevent violence in the short term, but a durable response requires lawful immigration systems, protection from mob intimidation, better public services, and honest action against corruption and exploitation. That includes employers who take advantage of undocumented workers and officials who fail both citizens and migrants. The priority now is to keep people safe and ensure that disputes over migration are handled by law, not by threats in the street. In Spain, a migrant regularization program ended Tuesday, closing a window for people seeking legal status under a scheme expected to benefit hundreds of thousands of applicants, mostly from Latin America. The program began in April and was predicted to benefit around 500,000 people. Applicants had to prove a clean criminal record and show that they had spent at least 5 consecutive months in Spain before January 1st. The program proceeded despite a broader European crackdown on irregular immigration. That makes Spain's approach notable. While many European governments have focused on tougher borders and faster removals, Spain created a pathway for people already living in the country to come forward and regularize their status. For applicants, legal status can change daily life in practical ways. It can mean the ability to work openly, rent housing more securely, access services, report abuse, and live without the constant fear of being removed. For families, it can mean children have more stability and parents have a better chance of finding formal employment. For Spain's economy, regularization can also bring workers into the tax system and reduce exploitation in sectors that often rely on migrant labor. That includes care work, agriculture, hospitality, and domestic services, where many workers are essential but vulnerable. The challenge now is processing applications fairly and efficiently. A regularization program can lose trust if people are left waiting too long, or if requirements are applied inconsistently. The end of the application window is not the end of the story. It begins the next phase, where Spain's institutions will determine whether the promise of legal stability becomes real for the people who stepped forward. In the United States, the Supreme Court has handed President Donald Trump a major legal victory by expanding his power to remove heads of regulatory agencies while ruling against him in 3 other matters. The court overturned precedent and gave Trump greater power to dismiss the heads of regulatory agencies. At the same time, one ruling prevented Trump from firing a Federal Reserve official. The court also declined Trump's appeal of a judgment against him in a sex abuse case. The ruling on regulatory agencies could have broad effects because those agencies oversee parts of daily life that matter to workers, consumers, and families. Independent regulators can shape rules on financial markets, labor conditions, product safety, communications, environmental protections, and competition. The more direct control a president has over agency leadership, the more quickly policy can shift after an election. Supporters of stronger presidential control often argue that elected leaders should be able to direct the executive branch and be held accountable for results. Critics warn that independent agencies exist to protect certain decisions from political pressure, especially where markets, public safety, or long-term stability are at stake. The separate ruling involving the Federal Reserve shows that the court is still drawing limits in some areas. The Fed's independence is closely watched because its decisions affect interest rates, inflation, mortgages, credit cards, jobs, and business investment. For ordinary Americans, the legal doctrine may sound technical, but the consequences can be concrete. Agency leadership affects how rules are enforced, how companies are regulated, and how much protection people have when they are dealing with powerful institutions. The court's decisions leave a more complicated picture than a simple win or loss. Trump gained major authority in one area, but faced limits in others. The lasting impact will depend on how the administration uses the expanded removal power and how Congress, agencies, and future courts respond. Follow for a daily world brief. Sources are linked in the description. By That's the World as Minerva saw it.